Hey, 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 long time no see. This is Kevin, and let's talk politics. I long avoided Twitter because I really didn't want to get on another social media platform, particularly one that is so ostentatiously left wing. I recently decided to start making YouTube videos, and upon realizing that most of the successful YouTubers were using Twitter as a way to generate more clicks, I decided I must sign up for Twitter. Now, I thought it wouldn't be as bad as the critics had maintained, but I discovered that Twitter is far worse than I had imagined. For example, I came across this tweet by a gentleman calling himself Kazim Rashid, where he complains that it's 3 years on and Flint, Michigan's water still has not been fixed. Mr. Rashid then follows up that tweet with another where he cites the 2016 U.S. military budget of $598 billion and the cost to fix Flint's water problems of $216 million, which is just a fraction of the military budget. What motivated my attention in the first place is the fact that maintaining the infrastructure of a city is a local responsibility. The budget for repairing Flint's water system comes from the city and the state, and the only federal agency relevant is the EPA. How much is spent on the military simply isn't germane. I polemically responded, "Get rid of the DNC in Flint, problem solved." The impetus for that comment was this: Flint, Michigan hasn't had a Republican-led bureaucracy in decades. In fact, the preponderance of America's problem cities are blue cities, in other words, Democrat cities. Detroit hasn't had Republican stewardship since 1957, Chicago 1927, St. Louis 1943, Oakland, California 1966. The list is long. After some snark directed towards me, I commented, "We don't have lead in our water here in Wichita, Kansas, most likely because the state isn't ran by moronic Democrats." A day later, my tweet attracted the attention of a man named Michael Van Elzakker, a neuroscientist no less, but Sam Harris he is not. Dr. Van Elzakker posted a link to Kansas.com accompanied with the comment, "Yeah, dude," the implication being that either I'm ignorant or a hypocrite. There was some back and forth, and as usual when dealing with people of this caliber, there was a bit of elitist snark. Honestly, for someone who chastised me on my comprehension, it's really surprising Dr. Van Elzakker didn't comprehend my tweet was about the water in Wichita, Kansas, not the entire state. The article he cited on Kansas.com told of 18 different sites where water had tested higher than the actual 15 parts per billion, but none of those were in Wichita. A quick read of the article revealed the cause of the high lead levels was possibly due to pipe joint or testing in older houses, things of that nature. In fact, the article indicated this was a sore subject for the manager of one of these water systems because results from another round of testing showed no violations of lead levels, and officials were baffled as to why they showed up on the EPA list. In the Kansas town of Greenfield, it was stated in the article they disputed the EPA listing, blaming its high sample on a miscalculation by state regulators. I'd assume, given his background, Dr. Van Elzakker is well versed in the physiological effects of lead that lead has on the brain. But I don't think he's a plumber. At least it doesn't seem to be, because he doesn't really have a clue why an otherwise safe water system might periodically test higher than 15 parts per billion. The fact is, copper pipe was widely used in the United States and around the world. Copper pipe joints use lead-based solder or brass fittings. Water will leach lead, copper, and zinc from all of this. As far as lead, the solder will leak around the joints, and the water will leach the lead out of the solder. As well, you have goosenecks that connect into the water mains, and often those are made of lead. Due to all this, it's recommended that you really should, when you turn on the faucet, you should let it run a little period of time to flush the system before drinking the water. And this applies to any place you might find yourself, new or old city, it doesn't matter. Virtually every water system has some level of lead, but in the United States, that level warrants action when it exceeds 15 parts per billion. Now, if you look at the 18 sites that it exceeded that 15 parts per billion here in Kansas, the majority of those were below 100 parts per billion, which was the older unenforced standard that had been around since 1925 and ended in 1991 when the new standard after that was 15 parts per billion. Now, the highest in Kansas in the list of 18 that they had in the paper was a trailer park in Salina that was at 647.2 parts per billion. Now, let's be clear. 16 of those 18 violations were all below the old standard of 100 parts per billion. 11 of those 18 were below 25 parts per billion, and 5 of those 18 were below 20 parts per billion. See, what you're seeing here in Kansas is a regulatory system that's working properly. The inspectors found the problem, and then those who maintain the water system rectified the problem. 98% of the water systems in Kansas are below the 15 parts per billion, and those tested above the 15 part per billion, 88% of those are below the 100 part per billion old-time standard. So it doesn't really, there's not a big problem. Now, when you put this all into perspective, the highest lead content recorded in Flint, Michigan was 13,000 parts per billion. How did the lead level even get to 100 parts per billion, let alone 13,000, without raising some attention? It had to be something like gross negligence, mismanagement, or possibly fraud. I mean, how else do these tests not get reported? They're either somebody's, winking and nodding, getting some cash under the table, or getting paid not to do the test at all. Something.
And the real point is this kind of mismanagement always seems so common in blue cities. Now, I want to conclude by saying that, with all due respect to Dr. Van Elzakker, the disingenuous nature of his line of reasoning and his comments towards me on Twitter strongly suggest two things. First, even though he claimed he wasn't a Democrat, he is acting like a Democrat. He's acting offended I placed blame for Flint, Michigan on the shoulders of Democrats. Now he's rushing in white nightlight to defend them just like a Democrat would. And second, the tone and tenor of his comments towards me are symptomatic of the divide that's in this nation. The gentry class acts with an unwarranted level of arrogance and hubris. They act as if they're royalty in a feudal society. Us rubes and plebes are supposed to bow down to our betters and defer to their wisdom, as if this was like, 10th century Europe instead of America. That elitist attitude axiomatically leads to characters like Trump. I didn't vote for the guy, and as my family can attest, thought he was a bad choice, but I clearly understand why he won. Physician, heal thyself first.